The afternoon sun streamed through the lace curtains of the Chun family's modest two-story home in Denver's Park Hill neighborhood, casting dancing shadows across 3-year-old Lily's pink and white toy kitchen. She carefully arranged her plastic teacups, humming a lullaby her grandmother had taught her that morning. Her dark pigtails bounced as she moved between her miniature refrigerator and stove, completely absorbed in her make-believe world of cooking and caring for her stuffed animals. "Lily, sweetheart, I'm just going to check on my tomatoes," her grandmother, May Chun, called from the kitchen doorway. At 73, May moved slowly, but still tended to her garden, with the dedication of someone who had grown up farming in rural China. "Stay inside and keep playing, little one. Nai will be right back." Lily nodded without looking up, too busy serving imaginary soup to her teddy bear to pay much attention. The back door closed with its familiar creak, leaving the house wrapped in peaceful quiet. Outside, the neighborhood hummed with typical Tuesday afternoon activity: lawn mowers buzzing, children playing in distant yards, and the gentle whoosh of cars passing on Montview Boulevard. From her position on the living room carpet, Lily had a perfect view through the large picture window that faced the Patterson house next door. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, 92 and living alone since her husband's death 3 years ago, was their kindest neighbor. She always waved from her garden and sometimes brought over fresh cookies that smelled like vanilla and made Lily's mouth water. As Lily reached for her toy teapot, movement in the Patterson house caught her eye. At first, she thought it might be Mrs. Patterson rearranging furniture. The elderly woman sometimes moved things around when she got restless. But something felt different. Wrong. A figure dressed in dark clothing moved through Mrs. Patterson's living room with jerky, urgent motions. The person wore a black baseball cap, pulled low, and something covering their face. Not like the fun masks Lily wore for Halloween, but something scary that made her stomach feel fluttery. Lily froze, her small hand still gripping the plastic teapot handle. The masked figure was throwing Mrs. Patterson's belongings around. Her beautiful lamp crashed to the floor. Papers scattered everywhere, and cushions flew off the sofa. This wasn't how people were supposed to act in houses. This was like the monsters in her storybooks, the ones that came and made messes and scared people. Then she heard a sound that made her blood turn cold. Mrs. Patterson's voice, high and terrified, screaming from somewhere deep in the house. "Help me! Someone help me! Please!" Lily's teapot slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor. Her heart hammered so hard she could hear it in her ears. She wanted to run to find Nai, but her legs felt like they were made of the jello her mom sometimes made for dessert, wobbly and useless. The screaming continued, mixed now with crashing sounds and Mrs. Patterson's weak voice pleading, "Please don't hurt me. I'm just an old lady. Take whatever you want. Just don't hurt me." Lily pressed herself against the wall beneath the window, trying to make herself as small as possible. Maybe if she became tiny enough, the scary person wouldn't see her. Maybe if she closed her eyes tight enough, this would all turn out to be a bad dream. But the nightmare got worse. The masked figure appeared at Mrs. Patterson's front window, and for one heart-stopping moment, turned toward the Chun house. Even through the mask, Lily could see eyes that looked angry and dangerous. The person stood perfectly still for what felt like forever, scanning the neighborhood as if checking whether anyone was watching. Those terrible eyes found Lily. Even crouched below the window, she somehow felt exposed, like those eyes could see right through walls and into her soul. The figure raised one hand, a hand that had something dark and twisted marked on it, like the dragon pictures in her coloring books, but scarier, and pointed directly at her window. Lily bit her lip so hard she tasted copper, fighting back the sob that wanted to escape. The person knew she was there. The person had seen her watching. After what seemed like hours, but was probably only seconds, the figure disappeared from the window. More crashing sounds came from inside Mrs. Patterson's house, followed by the slam of the back door and running footsteps fading into the distance. Mrs. Patterson's crying continued, weak and broken, calling out, "Hello? Is someone there? Can anyone hear me?" Lily wanted to help, wanted to be brave like the princesses in her favorite movies, but her body wouldn't obey her mind. Instead, she crawled away from the window on her hands and knees, moving like a scared little mouse until she reached the corner where her parents kept a tall bookshelf. She squeezed herself into the narrow space behind it, pulling her knees up to her chest and wrapping her arms around them. When Nai returned 10 minutes later, calling cheerfully about how well the tomatoes were growing, she found Lily's toys scattered across the living room, but no sign of her granddaughter. It took another 10 minutes of increasingly frantic searching before she discovered the little girl wedged behind the bookshelf, eyes wide and glassy, staring at nothing. "Lily, Lily, what's wrong, sweet baby?" May knelt down, her old knees protesting, and reached toward her granddaughter. But Lily didn't respond. She didn't speak, didn't cry, didn't even seem to recognize her beloved Nai. She just stared straight ahead with the hollow expression of someone who had seen something no child should ever have to witness. Outside, Mrs. Patterson's weak voice still called for help, and May Chun realized with growing horror that whatever had happened to her neighbor, her precious granddaughter, had somehow been a witness to it all. Detective Mike Torres had seen his share of traumatized witnesses in his 15 years with the Denver Police Department, but nothing quite like this. He stood in the Chun family's living room, 48 hours after the break-in, watching 3-year-old Lily peek around her mother's legs like a frightened rabbit. The child hadn't spoken a single word since the incident, and her parents, David and Susan Chun, were growing more desperate by the hour. "She used to chatter constantly," Susan whispered, her voice thick with exhaustion. Dark circles shadowed her eyes from 2 sleepless nights of holding her daughter, who woke up screaming every few hours. Now she won't even say "Mama" or "hungry." The pediatrician says there's nothing physically wrong with her, but David Chun, a software engineer who prided himself on solving problems, ran his hands through his disheveled hair. "Detective, we know she saw something. Mrs. Patterson told us she heard a child's voice calling out during the attack, saying help her over and over. That had to be Lily. But how do we get her to tell us what she witnessed without traumatizing her further?" Torres crouched down to Lily's eye level, his weathered face gentle, despite the badge and uniform that usually intimidated children. At 42, he'd learned that patience often succeeded where pressure failed. "Hey there, Lily. I'm Mike. I'm here to help catch the bad person who scared Mrs. Patterson." Lily's dark eyes darted toward him for a split second before she buried her face against her mother's jeans. Her tiny hands clutched Susan's legs with desperate strength, as if letting go might make her disappear entirely. That traditional interview techniques aren't working, Torres admitted to the parents. "She's too young and too traumatized for standard procedures. But I have an idea that might seem unconventional." He pulled out his phone and scrolled to a contact he'd never thought he'd use for a case like this. "There's a K9 unit that specializes in victim support, not drug detection or apprehension therapy. The dog's name is Justice, and he's been trained specifically to help trauma victims, especially children, feel safe enough to communicate." Susan frowned. "A police dog? Won't that scare her even more?" "Justice isn't like the German shepherds you're thinking of," Torres explained. "He's a golden retriever, specially selected for his calm temperament. He's worked with abuse victims, accident witnesses, even helped adults with PTSD testify in court. The handler, Officer Maria Santos, has a master's degree in psychology and 15 years of experience with traumatized children." David looked skeptical. "With respect, Detective, Our daughter won't even talk to us. What makes you think she'll open up to a dog? Sometimes children feel safer with animals than with people, Torres replied. Animals don't ask questions. They don't judge. They just provide comfort and unconditional acceptance. Justice has helped unlock testimony in cases where traditional methods failed completely. An hour later, Torres sat in his patrol car outside the Chun house, waiting for Officer Santos and Justice to arrive. Through the living room window, he could see Lily sitting in exactly the same position pressed against her mother's side, staring at the floor. The child's stillness was unnatural, disturbing. Most 3-year-olds were perpetual motion machines, but Lily had turned into a statue. The K-9 unit vehicle pulled up with unusual quietness. No sirens, no dramatic arrival. That might frighten an already traumatized child. Officer Maria Santos stepped out first, a compact woman in her 30s with kind eyes and prematurely gray hair that spoke to the emotional weight of her job. She moved to the back of the vehicle and opened a specially designed compartment. Justice emerged with the dignified grace that had made him legendary within the department. At 5 years old, the Golden Retriever had the perfect combination of training and natural empathy that made him irreplaceable. His golden coat gleamed in the afternoon sunlight, and his dark eyes held an intelligence that seemed almost human. He knows this is different, Santos explained to Torres as they walked toward the house. Justice can sense trauma from a distance. He's already adjusting his approach. See how he's moving slower than usual, keeping his head low and non-threatening? Indeed, Justice walked with deliberate gentleness, as if he understood that sudden movements or enthusiastic greetings might shatter whatever fragile composure the child was maintaining. The introductions happened gradually. Santos and Justice waited in the front yard for 10 minutes, allowing Lily to observe them through the window. The child's curiosity was the first sign of life she'd shown in days. Torres noticed her lifting her head slightly, tracking Justice's movements as he lay peacefully on the grass. "Can we come closer?" Santos called softly to the parents. "Let Justice sit on your front porch? Lily can watch from inside, completely safe." For another 20 minutes, Justice simply existed in Lily's line of sight. He didn't perform tricks or demand attention. He dozed in the shade, occasionally lifting his head to look around with calm interest, as natural as a neighbor's friendly pet. The breakthrough came when Lily pressed her small hand against the living room window. Justice's head turned toward the sound, and their eyes met through the glass. Instead of the fear that had marked all her interactions with people, something shifted in Lily's expression. Wonder, maybe. Or recognition of a kindred spirit who also preferred quiet observation to overwhelming interaction. "Can he come inside?" The words were barely audible, the first ones Lily had spoken since the incident, but they rang through the house like church bells. Susan Shun gasped, tears streaming down her face. David grabbed her hand, hardly daring to breathe. Torres looked at Santos, who nodded slowly. This was the moment that would determine whether their unconventional approach might actually work. Justice rose from his resting position and walked toward the front door with the same measured pace, as if he understood that everything depended on not frightening this small, brave girl who had finally found her voice. 5 days had passed since Justice first entered the Chun household, and the transformation was nothing short of miraculous. Detective Torres watched from the kitchen doorway as Lily sat cross-legged on the living room carpet, her small fingers gently stroking Justice's golden fur while she whispered secrets that only the therapy dog could hear. For the first time since the incident, she looked like a normal 3-year-old again, animated, curious, and slowly returning to the chatterbox her parents remembered. "She's been like this for hours," Susan Shun murmured, setting down a fresh cup of coffee for Torres. Yesterday she asked Justice if he wanted to play tea party. She actually giggled when he accidentally knocked over one of her tiny cups with his tail. Officer Santos sat nearby, taking careful notes while maintaining the relaxed atmosphere that had become their routine. Over the past week, she and Justice had spent several hours each day at the Chun house, allowing Lily to grow comfortable. With their presence, the child had progressed from silent observation to tentative interactions, and finally to treating Justice like her most trusted confidant. The bond they've formed is extraordinary, Santos observed quietly. In my 8 years doing this work, I've never seen a child connect so deeply with Justice. It's like they understand each other on a level that goes beyond words. Torres nodded, though his mind was focused on the bigger picture. While Lily's emotional recovery was remarkable, they still needed concrete information about what she had witnessed. Marcus Dragon Rodriguez remained free, and without Lily's testimony, they had no case. The pressure from his superiors was mounting daily. "Lily," Torres said gently, settling onto the carpet beside her and Justice. "You and Justice look like you're having important conversations. Can you tell me what you two talk about?" Lily looked up with bright eyes that held none of the haunted quality from days before. "Justice is very smart," she announced with the serious tone that 3-year-olds used for important matters. "He knows about scary things, but he's not scared because he's brave." "That's right," Torres agreed. "Justice helps people when scary things happen, just like how he's helping you feel better." Hung. Lily buried her face in Justice's neck, inhaling deeply. The dog remained perfectly still, as if he understood the significance of every moment. "He smells like sunshine and cookies." Santos exchanged a meaningful look with Torres. They were close to something. She could sense it in the way Lily's body language had shifted, becoming more open and trusting. "Lily," Santos said softly, "sometimes when scary things happen, it helps to tell Justice about them. He's very good at listening, and he never gets upset or angry about what people tell him." For a long moment, Lily continued stroking Justice's fur in silence. Then, so quietly that the adults had to strain to hear, she began to speak. "The Dragon Man came to Mrs. Patterson's house," she whispered into Justice's ear, as if the dog could somehow make the scary story less frightening. "He wore a black hat, like Daddy's baseball hat, but pulled down low so his eyes looked mean and shadowy." Torres felt his pulse quicken, but forced himself to remain calm and still. Susan Chun gripped her husband's hand so tightly her knuckles went white. "Justice wants to know more about the Dragon Man," Santos encouraged gently, speaking as if she were translating for the dog. "Can you tell him what the dragon looked like?" Lily sat up straighter, looking directly into Justice's patient brown eyes. "The dragon was on his hand right here." She pointed to the back of her own small hand. It was black and red and had scary teeth and fire coming out of its mouth. "Like the mean dragons in my storybooks, not the nice ones." Torres's heart pounded. A distinctive tattoo was exactly the kind of identifying detail they needed. But there was more. He could see it in the way Lily's expression had become more animated, as if Justice's presence was unlocking memories she'd kept buried. "The Dragon Man was looking for something special," Lily continued, her voice growing stronger. "He kept throwing Mrs. Patterson's pretty things around and making loud crash sounds. Mrs. Patterson was crying and saying, 'Please, please,' over and over." The child's voice caught slightly, but Justice seemed to sense her distress and shifted closer, pressing his warm body against her side in silent comfort. "Mrs. Patterson has a special box," Lily went on, her words tumbling out faster now. "It's silver and has pretty flowers carved on top. Mama showed it to me once when we brought Mrs. Patterson soup when she was sick. She said it was full of treasures from when she was young and beautiful." Torres and Santos exchanged another look. Mrs. Patterson hadn't mentioned any missing jewelry box in her initial statement. She'd been too traumatized to take a complete inventory of stolen items. "Did the Dragon Man take Mrs. Patterson's special box?" Santos asked gently. Lily nodded vigorously. He put it in a big black bag with other shiny things. But then, ... She paused dramatically, the way children do when they have something particularly important to share. Then what happened, sweetheart? Her father asked, unable to contain himself any longer. Then he was running away really fast, and something fell out of his pocket by the fence between our houses, Lily announced triumphantly. It was shiny like Mrs. Patterson's box, but smaller. It made a little noise when it hit the ground like when I dropped my toy keys. Torres was already mentally calculating the search grid for the area between the two houses. If Rodriguez had dropped something while fleeing, it could provide the physical evidence they desperately needed. Lily, he said carefully, you've been so brave to tell Justice about this. Can you show us exactly where the shiny thing fell? For the first time in the conversation, Lily hesitated. But then Justice stood up, stretching in his patient way, and walked toward the front door. The message was clear. He would be with her every step of the way. Okay, Lily said, taking hold of Justice's collar with one hand and reaching for Torres's hand with the other. But Justice has to come too. He makes the scary feeling smaller. As they walked toward the front door, Torres felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with a major breakthrough in a case. But more than that, he felt profound respect for the small, brave girl who had found her voice through the healing power of an extraordinary dog. The medical bracelet gleamed in the early morning sunlight as Detective Torres carefully lifted it from beneath the Chun family's fence with tweezers. Marcus A. Rodriguez, diabetes, emergency contact, Denver General Hospital, was engraved in block letters on the worn metal band. After 24 hours of intensive investigation, they now had their smoking gun. Son of a bitch, Torres muttered under his breath, then glanced apologetically at 3-year-old Lily, who was watching the evidence collection from her front porch with Justice pressed against her legs. Sorry, kiddo. Sometimes grown-ups use words they shouldn't when they're excited about catching bad guys. Lily giggled a sound that still made her parents' hearts soar after the week of silence they'd endured. Justice says you can say, son of a biscuit, instead, she announced, solemnly, making Santos nearly choke on her coffee. The levity was short-lived. Within 6 hours, Torres and his team had tracked Marcus Dragon Rodriguez to a seedy pawn shop on East Colfax Avenue, where he was attempting to sell an ornate silver jewelry box that perfectly matched Lily's description. When confronted, Rodriguez's dragon tattoo was impossible to deny, a snarling black and red beast that wrapped around his right hand, exactly as the child had described. But Rodriguez wasn't going quietly. You got nothing on me, detective, he sneered from the interrogation room, his cold eyes darting between Torres and the two-way mirror. At 34, Rodriguez had spent more years in prison than out, and his rap sheet read like a blueprint for escalating violence. Some bratty kid's fairy tale isn't going to hold up in court. My lawyer's already on his way. Torres leaned back in his chair, studying the man who had terrorized a 92-year-old woman and traumatized a 3-year-old child. We have your medical bracelet from the crime scene, Marcus. We have the stolen jewelry in your possession. And we have an eyewitness who can identify both you and your distinctive tattoo. Rodriguez's laugh was harsh and mirthless. A 3-year-old eyewitness? You're kidding me, right? Judge Patricia Moore will throw that out before the kid even opens her mouth. Everyone knows children that age can't tell the difference between reality and their imaginary friends. What Rodriguez didn't know was that Judge Moore had recently attended a judicial conference on innovative approaches to child testimony, including the use of therapy animals to help traumatized witnesses. But Torres kept that information to himself. The real problem emerged 2 hours later when Rodriguez's court-appointed attorney, Robert Nash, arrived. Nash was a 60-year-old shark who specialized in destroying prosecution cases through technicalities and intimidation. His reputation for crushing child witnesses was legendary, and his first phone call wasn't to discuss bail, it was to his investigator. "I want everything on the Chun family," Nash's voice carried from the courthouse hallway where Torres happened to be walking. Employment records, immigration status, financial problems, parking tickets, anything we can use to discredit their credibility. And I want surveillance on their house. If that kid is going to testify, I need to know every person who visits, every therapy session, every coaching conversation. Torres felt his blood run cold. Using private investigators to intimidate witnesses crossed ethical lines, but Nash had done it before and gotten away with it. The first sign of trouble came that evening. David Chun called Torres in a panic. "Detective, there's a man sitting in a car across from our house. He's been there for 3 hours, just watching." Lily saw him through her bedroom window and asked why the waiting man looked angry. Torres arrived within minutes to find a beat-up sedan parked strategically where it had a clear view of the Chun house. The driver, a heavy-set man with prison tattoos covering his arms, didn't even attempt to hide his surveillance. When Torres approached the vehicle, the man rolled down his window with deliberate slowness. "Carlos Rodriguez," he introduced himself with a cold smile that revealed gold teeth. "Marcus is my baby brother. Heard some people been telling lies about him." The threat was unmistakable, though carefully worded to avoid legal consequences. Carlos had done this dance before. He knew exactly how far he could push without crossing into criminal harassment. "Mr. Rodriguez," Torres said evenly, "this is a public street, but if you're here to intimidate witnesses in an ongoing criminal case, that's a felony. I'd suggest you find somewhere else to spend your evenings." Carlos's smile widened. "Just enjoying the neighborhood, detective. Nice family area. Lots of kids playing outside. Be a shame if something happened to disturb the peace." That night, Torres arranged for patrol cars to drive past the Chun house every hour. But Carlos was smart. He varied his surveillance times and locations, always staying just within legal bounds while making his presence felt. Lily began having nightmares again, waking up crying about the mean man who watches from the dark car. The breaking point came 3 days later when Susan Chun found a note tucked under her windshield wiper at the grocery store. Some secrets are better kept quiet. Smart families know when to mind their own business. "They're trying to scare us out of testifying," David Chun said during an emergency meeting at the police station. Lily sat on the floor nearby, playing quietly with Justice, while the adults talked in hushed, worried voices. "Maybe we should consider relocating until this is over. If you run now, Rodriguez walks free," Torres replied grimly. "He'll do this again to another family, another elderly victim. The pattern will continue." But even as he spoke, Torres could see the fear growing in the parents' eyes. They were good people who had never asked to be thrust into this nightmare. Their only concern was protecting their daughter, and he couldn't blame them for considering retreat. Officer Santos spoke up from where she sat monitoring Justice and Lily. "There's something else we need to consider. The defense attorney is Robert Nash. He specializes in destroying child witnesses on the stand. Even if Lily testifies beautifully, Nash will try to break her down during cross-examination." As if sensing the tension in the room, Lily looked up from her game with Justice. "Are the scary people trying to hurt Mrs. Patterson again?" she asked with the intuitive wisdom that sometimes emerged from young children. The adults exchanged glances over her head. The real battle was just beginning, and a 3-year-old girl had somehow become the key to whether justice would prevail or evil would triumph once again. District Attorney Sarah Williams sat across from Detective Torres in her corner office, surrounded by law books and case files that represented 30 years of fighting for justice in Denver's courts. At 55, she had prosecuted everything, from petty theft to capital murder, but the Rodriguez case presented unique challenges that kept her awake at night. Robert Nash has filed 17 motions to exclude Lily's testimony, she said, sliding a thick folder across her mahogany desk. He's claiming everything from false memory syndrome to parental coaching to prejudicial use of emotional support animals. The man is throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks. Torres flipped through the legal documents, his jaw tightening. With each page, half of these arguments contradict each other. First, he claims the child is too young to form reliable memories. Then he suggests the parents coached her with sophisticated details only an adult would know. Nash doesn't care about consistency, Williams replied grimly. He cares about creating reasonable doubt. If he can make the jury question even one aspect of Lily's credibility, Rodriguez walks free. And Nash has a 93% acquittal rate when his cases involve child witnesses under age 5. The statistics were sobering, but Torres had seen something in Lily Chun that transcended courtroom tactics, an innate honesty that shone through even her 3-year-old vocabulary. The challenge was protecting that authenticity while preparing her for Nash's inevitable assault. Meanwhile, 15 minutes across town, the Chun family was discovering that courage came in many forms. Word of Lily's upcoming testimony had spread through their neighborhood, and the response was both heartening and unexpected. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, the 92-year-old victim, had become Lily's most unlikely champion. Despite her own lingering trauma from the break-in, she insisted on visiting the Chun house daily, bringing homemade cookies and gentle encouragement. "That little girl saved my life," Mrs. Patterson told Susan Chun while they watched Lily and Justice play in the backyard. "If she hadn't been watching, if she hadn't called for help during the attack, Marcus Rodriguez might have done much worse than steal my jewelry. She's the bravest person I know, and I'm old enough to have known many brave people." The elderly woman's words carried special weight because Lily had overheard them. For a 3-year-old struggling to understand why grown-ups seemed scared and worried all the time, being called brave by the person she'd tried to help provided a crucial psychological anchor. Dr. Emily Foster, the child psychologist brought in to prepare Lily for testimony, had been working with trauma victims for 20 years, but she'd never encountered a case quite like this one. Her sessions with Lily took place in a specially designed playroom at the courthouse, with justice always present as both comfort and bridge to communication. Traditional preparation methods won't work here, Dr. Foster explained to the prosecution team during one of their strategy meetings. Lily processes information through play and imagination. We can't drill her like we would an adult witness. Instead, we need to help her understand the courtroom experience as another kind of story, one where she gets to help the good guys catch the bad guy. The breakthrough came during a session where Dr. Foster introduced toy figures representing the courtroom players, a judge, lawyers, jury members, and even a small golden retriever that looked remarkably like Justice. "This is a special room where people tell true stories," Dr. Foster explained, moving the toy judge to the head of a miniature courtroom setup. The judge is like a wise teacher who makes sure everyone follows the rules and stays safe. Lily examined each figure carefully, her small fingers tracing their features with the intense concentration that 3-year-olds brought to important tasks. "What about the Dragon Man?" she asked, looking around the toy setup. "The Dragon Man will be there too," Dr. Foster said gently. "But he has to sit far away and can't hurt anyone. There are special rules that keep everyone safe, and Justice will be right beside you the whole time." "Like a magic shield?" Lily asked, her eyes brightening. "Exactly like a magic shield," Dr. Foster confirmed, making a note about incorporating protective imagery into their preparation sessions. But the real test of Lily's readiness came during an unexpected encounter at the local supermarket. Susan Shun was shopping with Lily and Justice when they rounded a corner and came face to face with Carlos Rodriguez in the cereal aisle. 4. A moment, the two men, one threatening, one protective, stared at each other, while Lily pressed herself against Justice's side. Carlos's cold smile was the same one he'd worn during his surveillance of their house. "Cute kid," Carlos said, his voice carrying false friendliness that fooled no one. "Hope she doesn't have any accidents before the big day in court." The threat was clear, but instead of the terror that had consumed her during previous encounters. With danger, Lily surprised everyone by stepping slightly forward and looking directly at Carlos. "Justice says bad people try to scare good people because they're actually scared inside," she announced in her clear 3-year-old voice, loud enough that other shoppers turned to look. "And scared people can't hurt brave people who stick together." Carlos's smile faltered. Being challenged by a toddler in a public grocery store wasn't part of his intimidation playbook. Several other customers had stopped their shopping to watch the confrontation, and an elderly man was already pulling out his phone, presumably to call security. "Come on, Lily," Susan said, taking her daughter's hand while Justice positioned himself between them and Carlos. "We need to finish our shopping." As they walked away, Lily looked back over her shoulder and added, "Justice also says that when good people tell the truth, the scared people have to go away and think about how to be better." That evening, Torres received a call that changed everything. "Detective, this is Judge Patricia Moore's clerk. Her Honor has reviewed all the motions in the Rodriguez case, and she's ready to make her rulings. She wants to see you, District Attorney Williams, and defense counsel in her chambers tomorrow morning at 9 sharp. The legal battle for Lily's right to testify was about to begin, and everyone knew that Judge Moore's decisions would determine whether a 3-year-old's courage would be enough to bring a dangerous criminal to justice. Outside the Chun house, Carlos Rodriguez sat in his car, but for the first time since beginning his surveillance, he looked uncertain. Something about the little girl's fearless response had shaken his confidence, and he couldn't quite explain why a toddler's words about truth and courage had left him feeling like the scared one. Judge Patricia Moore's courtroom had never seen anything quite like the media circus that surrounded People v. Rodriguez. By 7 in the morning, news vans lined the streets outside the Denver County Courthouse, their satellite dishes reaching toward the gray October sky like modern sculptures. Reporters clutched coffee cups and practiced their opening lines about the groundbreaking case that could change how child witnesses testify. Inside her chambers, Judge Moore reviewed the mountain of legal briefs one final time. At 62, she had presided over thousands of cases during her 23 years on the bench, but none had generated this level of public attention or legal precedent. Her decision about allowing justice in the courtroom would be scrutinized by every appellate court in the country. The defense argues that the presence of a therapy dog will create undue sympathy and prejudice the jury against the defendant, she murmured to her clerk while adjusting her reading glasses. The prosecution argues that denying the child this accommodation violates her constitutional right to due process and equal access to justice. 3 floors below, in a specially designated witness preparation room, 3-year-old Lily Chun sat cross-legged on a colorful carpet, carefully brushing Justice's golden coat with a miniature grooming brush. The therapy dog remained perfectly still, sensing the importance of the morning routine that had become their pre-testimony ritual. "Justice looks very handsome today," Officer Santos observed, checking her watch. They had 30 minutes before the judge would hear arguments about whether Justice could accompany Lily to the witness stand. "Are you ready to visit the special storytelling room?" Lily nodded solemnly, her small face showing a maturity that seemed far beyond her years. Over the past month, she had transformed from a traumatized, silent child into a determined little girl who understood her role in protecting other people from the Dragon Man. Justice says we're going to tell the most important true story ever, Lily announced, her voice carrying the matter-of-fact confidence that only 3-year-olds could manage when discussing life-changing events. And true stories are stronger than scary lies. Detective Torres knocked softly on the door. Lily? Judge Moore is ready to meet with you and Justice in her chambers. She wants to see how you two work together before she makes her decision. The walk to Judge Moore's chambers felt like a journey through a gauntlet. Court personnel stopped their conversations to stare as the unusual procession made its way down the marble corridors. A tiny girl holding the collar of a golden retriever, flanked by a detective, a therapy dog handler, and a child psychologist. Judge Moore's chambers were designed to intimidate towering bookshelves filled with legal tomes, formal portraits of past judges, and a massive desk that seemed to dwarf everything around it. But Lily showed no fear as she entered, her confidence anchored by Justice's calm presence beside her. "Good morning, Lily," Judge Moore said, her voice gentler than the stern tone she used in open court. "I'm Judge Moore. I'm the person who makes sure everyone follows the rules when people tell their stories in the courtroom." "Like a teacher?" Lily asked, settling onto the carpet with Justice automatically positioning himself beside her. "Exactly like a teacher," Judge Moore confirmed, impressed by the child's composure. "Lily, some people think Justice might make the story listeners feel too sorry for you. What do you think about that?" Lily considered the question with the serious deliberation that marked all her important decisions. "Justice doesn't make people feel sorry," she said finally. "Justice makes me feel brave enough to tell the truth. And truth is what matters in the special storytelling room, right?" Judge Moore exchanged glances with the adults in the room. In 30 seconds, this 3-year-old had articulated the fundamental purpose of judicial proceedings better than most law school graduates. "Can you tell me a story without justice here?" the judge asked gently, gesturing for Officer Santos to take the dog to the far side of the room. Immediately, Lily's posture changed. Her shoulders hunched, her voice became smaller, and her eyes darted anxiously around the room. "The Dragon Man?" she began, then stopped, pressing her hands against her temples. "I can't remember the scary parts when Justice isn't close." Officer Santos brought Justice back to Lily's side, and the transformation was instantaneous. The child's shoulders relaxed, her voice regained its clarity, and her eyes met Judge Moore's with steady confidence. "Now I remember everything," Lily announced. The Dragon Man had angry eyes and threw Mrs. Patterson's pretty things around and took her special treasure box and dropped the shiny thing by our fence. Judge Moore had her answer. 20 minutes later, she emerged from chambers to face a packed courtroom that buzzed with anticipation. Defense attorney Robert Nash sat at his table with Marcus Rodriguez, both men radiating the cold confidence of predators who had never lost to a 3-year-old. District Attorney Sarah Williams stood at the prosecution table, surrounded by case files and legal precedents, but her attention was focused on the small viewing room, where Lily waited with her support team. After careful consideration of all arguments and legal precedents, Judge Moore announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the silent courtroom. "This court finds that the presence of a certified therapy dog serves a legitimate therapeutic purpose and does not unduly prejudice the proceedings. The dog Justice will be permitted to accompany the witness during her testimony." The courtroom erupted. Reporters scribbled frantically. Legal observers leaned forward in their seats, and Marcus Rodriguez's expression shifted from smugness to concern for the first time since his arrest. Robert Nash immediately stood. "Your Honor, the defense objects in the strongest possible terms. This unprecedented decision violates my client's right to a fair trial, and, Mr. Nash," Judge Moore interrupted sharply, "your objection is noted for the record. However, This court will not deny a child witness reasonable accommodations that enable her to testify truthfully and completely. The jury will be instructed that the dog's presence is purely for the witness's comfort and should not influence their deliberations. As the morning session recessed, Lily remained in the witness preparation room, completely unaware that her right to have justice beside her had just become legal history. She was focused on more important matters, practicing the true story. She was about to tell, with her best friend and protector by her side. Outside the courthouse, the media frenzy intensified. But inside the building, a 3-year-old girl and a golden retriever were quietly preparing to prove that courage comes in all sizes, and justice sometimes arrives on 4 paws. Wake up to barista quality coffee with the Brewmaster coffee maker. With a single touch, brew the perfect cup every morning, customized to your taste. Sleek, easy to use, and designed to make every day a little better. Order now to transform your mornings. The courtroom had never felt more electric with tension than it did at 2:15 p.m. on October 18th, when Bailiff Thomas McCarthy announced, "The people call Lily Chun to the witness stand." The packed gallery fell into absolute silence. Kind of profound quiet that occurs when hundreds of people collectively hold their breath. Lily emerged from the witness preparation room, holding Officer Santos's hand, her other small fist gripping Justice's leash with the determination of someone who understood that everything important in her world depended on the next few minutes. She wore a pale blue dress that her grandmother had carefully chosen, the same color as Justice's service vest, and her dark hair was pulled back with small butterfly clips that caught the courtroom's fluorescent lights. The witness stand had been modified specifically for this moment. Court maintenance had installed a lower step and a smaller chair, while a soft cushion on the floor beside the stand marked where Justice would lie during testimony. As Lily approached, every person in the courtroom could see both her courage and her vulnerability, a tiny figure walking toward a moment that would define justice for everyone watching. "Take your time, sweetheart," Judge Moore said softly, her usual stern courtroom voice replaced by the gentle tone she reserved for the most delicate moments. "Justice can lie right there beside you, just like we practiced." Defense attorney Robert Nash had spent 30 years perfecting his ability to intimidate witnesses. But as he watched Lily settle into the witness chair, with Justice's golden head resting near her feet, he felt something he rarely experienced in courtrooms, genuine uncertainty about his strategy. District Attorney Sarah Williams approached the witness stand with the careful movements of someone approaching a wild bird that might fly away at any sudden motion. She had prosecuted hundreds of cases, but never one where so much depended on the testimony of someone who still needed help tying her shoes. "Lily, can you tell the nice people here your full name?" Williams began, her voice warm and encouraging. "Lily Mae Chun," came the clear response, each syllable pronounced with the careful precision that 3-year-olds used when they wanted to be sure grown-ups understood important information. "I'm 3 years old, and I live in the house next to Mrs. Patterson." "That's wonderful, Lily. Can you tell us about Mrs. Patterson?" Lily's face brightened immediately. "Mrs. Patterson is very nice and very old, 92 years old, which is older than anybody I know. She makes cookies that smell like vanilla, and she has a garden with flowers that look like dancing ladies when the wind blows them. Several." Jurors smiled at the child's innocent description, and Williams could sense the emotional connection forming between Lily and the 12 people who would determine Marcus Rodriguez's fate. "Lily, do you remember a day when something scary happened at Mrs. Patterson's house?" The change in Lily's demeanor was subtle but unmistakable. Her small hand reached down to touch Justice's fur, and the therapy dog immediately shifted closer, pressing his warm body against her leg. The physical contact seemed to strengthen her resolve. "Yes," Lily said, her voice becoming more serious. It was the day the Dragon Man came and made Mrs. Patterson cry. "Can you tell us about the dragon, man?" Lily took a deep breath, her fingers continuing to stroke Justice's golden coat as she gathered her thoughts. The Dragon Man wore all black clothes and a hat that made shadows on his face, so he looked scary. He went into Mrs. Patterson's house when she was supposed to be safe, and he threw her pretty things around and made loud crashing noises. Marcus Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably at the defense table, his confident smirk finally beginning to fade as his victim's words hung in the courtroom air. "Did you see the Dragon Man's face, Lily?" "Not his whole face because of the shadow hat, but I saw his eyes. They were angry eyes that looked mean and scary." Lily paused and pointed directly at Rodriguez without hesitation. "Those are the same angry eyes. That's the Dragon Man sitting right there." The courtroom stirred as Rodriguez's attorney immediately objected, but Judge Moore overruled him, noting that the identification was clear and uncoached. Robert Nash knew his moment had arrived. Rising from the defense table with the predatory confidence that had destroyed countless witnesses, he approached Lily with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Hello, Lily," he began, his voice deceptively friendly. "I'm Mr. Nash. I need to ask you some questions, okay?" Lily nodded solemnly, her hand never leaving Justice's fur. "Now, Lily, you like to play pretend games, don't you? You have tea parties with your stuffed animals and make up stories about dragons and princesses?" "Sometimes," Lily admitted, though. Her voice carried a note of wariness that hadn't been there during the prosecutor's questions. "And sometimes when you play pretend, the stories feel very real, don't they? Like when you dream at night." District Attorney Williams tensed, recognizing the classic technique Nash used to undermine child witnesses by blurring the lines between fantasy and reality. But Lily Chun was not like other 3-year-old witnesses Nash had faced. She looked directly at him with the same steady gaze she had used to identify Rodriguez, and her response carried a wisdom that seemed impossible for someone so young. "Mr. Nash," she said, using the formal address with surprising dignity, "I know the difference between pretend games and true things. Pretend games are fun, and nobody gets hurt. True things sometimes hurt people, like when the Dragon Man hurt Mrs. Patterson and made her scared and sad." Nash tried a different approach, his voice becoming slightly more aggressive. "But Lily, isn't it possible that you saw something that scared you, and your imagination turned it into a dragon story?" For the first time during her testimony, Lily looked down at Justice, whose brown eyes gazed back at her with infinite patience and trust. When she looked back up at Nash, her voice carried a strength that made hardened court reporters pause in their typing. "Justice doesn't pretend," she announced with absolute certainty. "Justice only knows true things." And Justice was there when I remembered everything about the Dragon Man. Justice helped me be brave enough to tell the truth, because truth is what keeps people safe from dragons. The courtroom fell completely silent. Nash stood frozen, realizing that his usual tactics had not only failed, but had actually strengthened the child's credibility. He had one more weapon in his arsenal, the crushing blow he had planned from the beginning, but something in Lily's unwavering gaze made him hesitate for the first time in his career. Defense attorney Robert Nash stood at the crossroads of his career, staring down at a 3-year-old girl whose steady gaze had already dismantled 30 years of courtroom intimidation tactics. The packed courtroom waited in absolute silence, sensing that whatever happened next would determine not just the fate of Marcus Rodriguez, but the very nature of justice itself. Nash had built his reputation on a simple strategy: find the breaking point of every witness and push until they crumbled. Children were especially vulnerable, their emotions raw, their memories fragile, their confidence easily shattered by adult aggression. He had one final weapon, a nuclear option he saved for moments when everything else failed. "Lily," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that forced everyone in the courtroom to lean forward. "Do you know what happens to little girls who tell lies in court?" The question hit like a physical blow. Several jurors visibly recoiled, and District Attorney Williams half rose from her chair before Judge Moore's sharp look warned her not to interrupt. This was Nash's most devastating technique implanting. The seed of fear that the child might be lying, while simultaneously threatening consequences for dishonesty. But instead of the tears and confusion Nash expected, Lily tilted her small head and considered his question with the same thoughtful expression she used when deciding between chocolate and vanilla ice cream. "Mr. Nash," she said finally, her voice carrying a clarity that seemed to fill every corner of the vast courtroom. "I think you're asking the wrong question." Nash blinked, completely thrown off balance. In 3 decades of destroying witnesses, no one, especially not a toddler, had ever told him he was asking the wrong question. "The right question," Lily continued, her small hand resting on Justice's golden head, "is what happens when good people don't tell the truth about bad things." She paused, looking around the courtroom with the innocent wisdom that sometimes emerges from children who have seen too much. Her gaze settled on Mrs. Patterson, sitting in the front row with tears streaming down her elderly cheeks, then moved to her own parents, whose faces showed a mixture of pride and protective fear. "Justice told me something very important," Lily announced, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. Every person in the courtroom, hardened criminals, cynical reporters, experienced attorneys, found themselves hanging on the words of a 3-year-old child. Nash opened his mouth to object that dogs couldn't actually speak, then closed it, realizing how ridiculous he would sound arguing with a child about the metaphorical nature of her relationship with a therapy animal. Lily looked directly at Marcus Rodriguez, who had spent the entire trial radiating menace and contempt. For the first time since his arrest, Rodriguez found himself unable to maintain eye contact with his victim. "Justice says that when scary people try to hurt good people, they're not really strong like dragons," Lily said, her small voice carrying to every corner of the silent courtroom. "They're actually just very, very scared inside, like little animals that bite when they're frightened." Rodriguez's lawyer started to object, but Judge Moore silenced him with a gesture, as transfixed as everyone else by the child's extraordinary testimony. "And justice says that when good people stand together and tell the truth, even when it's scary, something magical happens." Lily's eyes began to shine with the certainty of someone who had discovered a fundamental truth about the universe. The scared mean people stop being dragons and turn back into just regular people who need help learning how to be good. The courtroom was so quiet that the only sounds were the gentle whir of the ventilation system and Justice's soft breathing as he lay beside the witness stand. "But the most important thing Justice told me," Lily continued, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow reached every person in the room, "is that love is stronger than being scared, and truth is stronger than lies, and when people help each other, nobody has to be afraid of dragons anymore." She looked directly at Nash, then at Rodriguez, and finally at the jury with the fearless honesty that only children possess. "So I'm not scared of the Dragon Man anymore, because justice helped me remember that telling the truth turns dragons back into people, and people can learn to be better." The silence that followed was unlike anything the Denver County Courthouse had ever experienced. Court reporter Margaret Flynn, who had transcribed thousands of testimonies over 25 years, found her hands frozen over her keyboard, tears blurring her vision. In the gallery, grown men wiped their eyes openly, while seasoned attorneys stared in amazement at what they had just witnessed. Marcus Rodriguez, the career criminal who had terrorized elderly victims across the city, began to cry at the defense table. Not the manipulative tears of someone trying to win sympathy, but the deep, wrenching sobs of a man confronting his own humanity for the first time in decades. Robert Nash, the destroyer of witnesses, the architect of legal devastation, stood, motionless for 30 seconds, before slowly returning to his seat. "No further questions, Your Honor," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The jury deliberated for exactly 8 minutes, not to determine guilt, but to compose themselves enough to return a verdict. When they filed back into the courtroom, their faces showed the same transformation that had come over everyone who heard Lily's testimony. "We find the defendant guilty on all charges," the foreman announced, his voice heavy with emotion. But the real transformation had already begun. Marcus Rodriguez approached the bench with his attorney, tears still streaming down his face. "Your Honor, I want to change my plea. I want to plead guilty and accept responsibility for what I've done. That little girl, she's right. I need help learning how to be better." Judge Moore, who had presided over thousands of cases without ever seeing a defendant's genuine remorse, sentenced Rodriguez to 15 years with the possibility of rehabilitation programs, a decision influenced by his victim's family, who advocated for healing rather than pure punishment. The case of People v. Rodriguez became legal precedent across the nation, not just for the use of therapy animals in courtrooms, but for the power of truth spoken with courage and compassion. Justice became the first permanently assigned courthouse. Therapy dog in Colorado history, and the Chun Standard became the model for accommodating child witnesses nationwide. But the real victory belonged to a 3-year-old girl who proved that sometimes the most profound truths come from the smallest voices, and that courage, love, and justice can indeed transform dragons back into people who simply need to learn how to be better.